everyone. Welcome to The Trust Layer Has Collapsed, How AI is Rewriting the Rules of Business Email Security. Who's in the room with us today? We have Robert Prawl, Director of Security here at Divergent, Connor Beskos, our VP of IT Operations, and Andrew Scott, Field CISO at our partner Total.
Hey everybody, thank you for joining us today. We're really excited to share this information. I think it's more important than ever for you to understand what role and what actions you can take to protect your business. Lots of very scary things coming out in the news right now about the dangers that are out there. So today we really want to focus on one specific change that affects almost every business that accepts ACH. And there'll be lots of useful information, things that you can take away, simple actions you can take from this. So the first thing we want to do is establish what the problem is. So many of you may be aware of a couple terms, things like phishing attacks. Maybe you've even heard of BEC, which stands for Business Email Compromise Attacks. The real key piece of information to take away from is that I want to get past is forget about the idea that you're a target for an attacker for some reason. Ultimately, most people are caught up in what is a very broad net. And to establish the idea that this is a broad net is in 2025, the projected losses associated with business email compromise were in excess of $3 billion. And this is reported by the FBI. This is real numbers, and that is astonishing just how much financial loss and financial risk is associated with this specific kind of attack. So that's not all the attacks, that's specifically business email compromise. And it actually has surged. So what you're seeing on the right there represents the increase, the percentage increase of attacks versus past years. And they've actually seen a 1,700 plus increase in the number of attacks that are affecting people in the reports, et cetera. So part of the reason that all of this is by far exceeding the other attacks you may be familiar with, the big scary one previously was ransomware attacks. They were going to hold you ransom, encrypt your data. But now business email compromise is the number one risk out there. This is the one by far putting your company at risk. And the combination of AI and its ability to increase productivity has fueled this massive percentage increase you're seeing. So that's why today's title is The Trust Layers Collapsed. Ultimately what they're trying to target is this idea that you have someone that you work with that sends email, and that's considered a trust relationship, right? You've communicated with them so many times, but today you don't know when that trust has been compromised. So here we have Connor Beskos going to step in and talk you through what does one of these scenarios actually look like.
Thanks, Robert. Yeah, absolutely. So I want to zoom in a little bit and we can jump into inside a real moment. It's 4:52 on a Friday afternoon with the weekend coming up. Your AP team is wrapping up. Everybody's getting ready to head out. And one more email comes in. It's from a vendor you've paid for years. It's someone you have an existing relationship with, someone you've trusted and emailed before. And the key is it's in a reply to an existing email, something you've already kind of gone back and forth on. Nothing's misspelled, nothing looks off. It's in a voice that matches what has gone on previously. So they've mentioned they switched banks this quarter and asked you to route the outstanding $250,000 or $214,000 to a new account. So what do you do as a good partner? Your AP team ultimately does exactly what they do, and they pay it. And then here's the part, and one of the takeaways that you should have from today is that email passes every technical filter that we have in place. So all your systems are working as they would expect. because it really did come from a legitimate email account. And by Monday, that money's gone. And every single technical control you own, worked exactly as it was designed. Nothing failed. And that's what makes this slightly different than other attacks. So let's explain what actually happened here. So what is business email compromise? It's not a virus, it's a con, and it runs straight through your own trust, the human trust element. The textbook definition of fraud that manipulates a real person into approving a real payment, often from a real trusted account. And so let's look at why your tools can't catch it. Generally, there's no malware. There's nothing to quarantine in an email. There's no payload that your endpoint or malware or email security filter to flag. There's not a bad link in there. It's clean text inside a conversation you started. And it comes from a real sender, usually someone who's genuinely compromised from a vendor or inside on an employee mailbox. Your security tools and filters are built to hunt for attacks, and this one doesn't look like an attack until the money moves through the human process of it. So to walk you through why this matters now, I'll hand it over to Robert.
So why now? Why now? We've kind of established that statistically this is on the rise, but historically we've depended on hardening your weakest link, which is your humans, your people, your employees. We've provided security training to identify threats. Ultimately, you're looking for misspellings, you're looking for strange domains. We've trained them to look for all of these key indicators. And the problem is now with AI, it's really easy to make things that look and feel just like the communications that they're used to receiving from that sender. So imagine it this way. We're going to dive a little bit into the specifics, chain of events in a BEC attack, but now they're actually able to watch the communications and craft it to look just like the voice and tone of someone they may be dealing with all the time. And now, second, the industry is starting to catch up. They're starting to see more and more of these ACH frauds being actioned and being reported as a result of the combination of BEC attacks, the viability of those, and the AI tools making it more viable to slip through both the technical controls and the training that you've provided for your employees. We'll talk a little bit more in detail about how this actually happens so that you can visualize exactly what's happening at the user level here. So all of this business email compromises start with that single email. Now, what's important to remember here is in this scenario where you're talking about your employee communicating with another entity, so whether that's a vendor or a client or anybody who you engage with financial transactions with, either end of that chain could be compromised. And we see it all the time. So we see it all the time where someone changes the wire or the ACH information on a transaction because the remote party requested it, someone that they trust. Turns out you are not compromised. It's the other party has been compromised. The attacker is sitting there watching all those emails go back and forth, and then knowing when to step in and send that suspicious email. So it all starts with that first person being phished, and that means they've been sent an email that has some sort of link that allows the attacker to harvest their credentials. Now, that could be that they present them a login screen where they enter their credentials. It could be that they harvest their authentication token. There's a few different ways that are very simple for a phishing attack to accomplish that goal so that they can actually log in to like their Office 365 email box through the web and then suddenly take over that mailbox and have the ability to perpetrate the attack. So during that mailbox takeover, what they're doing is literally creating things like forwarding rules. So they could have a forwarding rule that is looking for anything related to a transaction. So as soon as that transaction starts, they know when to step in and say, oh, no, no, by the way, we want you to change this information, right? Then there's usually a clean email. There's some sort of request, that transaction that starts it. Then there's a change. And what's really interesting today is now these attacks are even happening internally to an organization. So you may even heard of CFO spoofing, CEO spoofing. So where they'll actually use deep fake AI techniques to try to overcome the normal, oh, this is a trusted person that I deal with. I know their voice. I know their face. Well, now you can no longer depend on those, right? So now we need to think about how do we go ahead and avoid depending on trust as the layer, right? And so the end result is your person, depending on these legacy techniques to identify valid requests, ends up funding, releasing the funds or making that change. So that's why it works. That's right. Again and again throughout this chain, we've depended on trust as part of our mechanism to authenticate requests. So this is why we're so excited to have Andrew with us today. Again, this is one of those where it's important to have all your technical controls in place. And some of you may want to talk to us more about that as you hear more information to help harden your environment in total. But right now, I think the most important thing that we want to share with you is how the Nacha rules are changing. So they're shifting that responsibility of who is accountable for this fraud situation. So if you make that change, you can be the liable party. So with that, I'd like to introduce Andrew Scott. He's been so kind to join us. He's a field CISO with Total, and he's here to share the latest information on how you should be accounting for these Nacha rule changes.
Yeah, appreciate it, Robert. Thanks for that. Yeah, so I think let's kind of go on this journey, right? As you and kind of really already laid out for us. We're going to dive a little bit deeper of what do these cyber attacks look like more granularly, kind of how does this work, and then really what are those natural regulations? Some people on the line may not have even heard of them, but it's really this, the industry, as you mentioned, Robert, writing the regulators starting to say, look, enough is enough. The loss is $3 billion, at least what was reported, right? That's a key thing. It could be far more. But that's a lot of money that's getting lost due to fraud. How do we combat this better? And so Nacha has stepped in to expect that it's, participants are going to really level up their risk-based controls right there and some strategies to do that. So let's take a look at, kind of just generally how these AI-enhanced cyber attacks happen. Just what is it that it's achieving? So it's really, as you already mentioned, Robert, but for everyone, we're all probably using AI for the same goals of efficiency, for productivity, for time savings, for maybe I want to tweak and tailor an email or some sort of deck for my leader or something like that really kind of hits the note. It's the same aspects, right? So the same playbook before of, as you mentioned, it's the generic, it's the phishing email, it's the tugging at the heartstrings and the human element that is being exploited here, right? That, I got that email late, as Connor mentioned, I got that pressure, I want to get out to go home to my family, but I got to deal with this. It's that urgency aspect that before was typo ridden, right? Really kind of, very, more obvious than not. Now with AI, it's really the ability to understand the target, right? Of who they're going to, how they're going to make it sound like that person or that request. Maybe they're going to match that tone. They're going to sit and watch the correspondence in that email inbox so they know kind of how you talk. Everyone has that little way that you communicate. And the AI system reconnaissance, just really being able to properly target certain organizations, right, or certain users, much easier, right? And at a scale we haven't seen before. So instead of a spray and pray type approach that I'm going to blast out thousands of phishing emails, maybe it's a little bit more targeted, but they're going to go after maybe finance teams or HR teams, account payable teams, certain leadership that may, have capability making, powers there, or sorry, decision making powers. But really the bottom line that I want everyone to take away here, AI is effectively not creating any new major categories of cybercrime. It's accelerating the ones that we're already facing. What's a modern BEC incident look like? What does this look like, that business email compromise, kind of that example that Connor showed? Right? So day one, that adversary is going to get, right, a trusted mailbox compromise. They're going to steal someone's credentials. Now I've got access to look at their email communications, who they're corresponding with, et cetera. I'm going to be watching and identifying as an attacker what vendors or internal accounts, right, can I also communicate with? Who is taking, kind of certain decisions? Who has, these various different powers? I'm going to start watching that. Then a couple days later, once they observe that, then they're going to say, that real email, that real thread that Robert was talking about, that payment change. Hey, we need to get this, kind of change quickly. And they're also going to then maybe follow up or include some aspect of urgency. There's always going to be some mandated change. That's a key, clear, definite, signal of phishing often, right? Is if you don't make this change or do this decision now, there's some other implication, right? So just be really cautious there. But then they're starting to weave in those voice and deepfake follow-ups, right? And this is where trust really starts to break down. We think we trusted the people we work with enough that, oh, I know who this person is. Now we can't trust that. Then I hear their voice or a video call, right? Or something like that, quick, hit, kind of midday here. Then it's about, right, kind of that trust being reinforced from an outside email or an outside person. I thought I understood, who that person was. Not so. And then, right, that payment release requested. Can we please get that? Kind of that payment finalized. It's this constant pressure, right, where organizations throughout this cadence really get, kind of caught up in, well, I guess it's a legitimate transaction, and so we need to go ahead and push this through. And only until later is it, wait, we haven't actually paid the right person, on that timeline. The incident gets escalated because, well, we didn't get paid, and then it's like, wait, where did that money go? So often it's well beyond or well after, right, that payment has been issued and that account was formally taken over and everything, involving the sequence, that organizations, really start to find out they've simply paid the wrong person. So this is where, this may be viewed as a financial control, right? Well, we need to implement, kind of a second person to verify or something else. But it's important to also look at, this starts with a technology issue predominantly, right? And this is really where organizations can benefit from, kind of investments in cybersecurity or using technology to their benefit. Not only is it protecting your organization, but it's also preventing a lot of the way that these things happen, because that's where it's starting. So if you look at this example, really every stage of this sequence is really a great chance to intervene and be able to reduce risk or stop this process. So, if we look at, for instance, mailboxes getting compromised, there's some acronyms here in the middle where Total and Diverge are working on this together for, the market and our joint customers and people who need it. But this is where identity threat detection response really is the key 4-letter acronym there that I would say. It's watching for and understanding this isn't actually this user who they say they are logging in. They're not coming from a trusted device, a trusted network. I don't know if I, really believe this person. I'm going to actually be able to respond and maybe say, I'm not going to allow you, I'm going to suspend that account. So we're stopping that to begin with. But let's say we don't have that, right? Then payment change email, if suddenly we start to see that there's a risky login, right, kind of cloud activity email, looking across the different mechanisms of, how we see this communication chain going, that's where, right, a SIM, which is Security Information Management, this is really the brain. It understands what is not normal across an entire ecosystem, entire business, really looking for those hidden threats. And then that MXDR is a SOC team, right, 24/7, really security analysts constantly looking at this detail and saying, is this normal or not, and be able to respond directly to it. So at every stage through this, right, even before, let's say, a payment release, or even if it's escalation, there's a technology benefit here of really being able to use that to power, right, and protect your organization, both from an identity perspective, but also preventing fraud before it starts to occur. I think that's where I'd encourage everyone to, kind of really consider, right, Robert, you mentioned, is phishing too advanced now in a way that, hey, what is the other controls or other capabilities we have that if we assume someone's credentials are going to be stolen, God forbid, or MFA token being bypassed, how do I start to monitor, is this legitimate user? How do I protect that information and from getting into this actual BEC cycle to begin with? So how is NACHA looking at this? So I mentioned that regulators are starting to step in, right? So NACHA is the National American Clearinghouse Association. They govern the ACH network. And so they're looking at this in terms of ultimately the amount of payment, kind of fraud and risk that is accompanying it. And they're expecting that their members are going to now comply with various different requirements. So there are really 5 key habits or requirements that everyone should start to really embody and do if you're taking any sort of ACH or providing or sending ACH payments. First things first, really monitor your ACH activity. Work with your account payable team, your finance team, et cetera. Know who and where you're sending money to, right? Sounds simple, but organizations have a lot of different vendors, a lot of different things. Maybe you're doing even direct deposit. How do we make sure we're sending, money to the right people? So have that full, financial monitoring aspect. That is what, NACHA is really expecting, that you have that understanding and that documentation, that governance around it. Second, validating high risk changes. Why is someone asking to pay a new person or to make an account or a payroll change or urgent payment requests? You need to have a really strong process and function around this, not just for people and but also the way that people will get, let's say, email. If you're going to allow email changes, you need a process and kind of structure around that. You got to review your controls annually. This means having those policies and procedures, both from a finance, but increasingly because of the way that email and BEC is being used, probably an IT and information security policy and procedure also. How are we handling this? How we have it in that evidence, et cetera. We talked about the BEC aspect as the number one threat. And this is where NACHA has really evolved as well, right? The updated rules. So identifying false induced entries or requests. This is the false pretenses definition that is changing. So NACHA has really defined false pretenses. Basically, is someone masquerading as someone else or asking them to wire or send money, right, by ACH under false pretenses or fraud? So this is where they're expecting that organizations are now going to level up and be able to better battle fraud and take kind of responsibility, that shared responsibility there, to really know when a payment request or a payment sent is done under the guise of false pretenses. And this is where BEC is critical. So again, much like an organization may have a information security policy or is there a response process of, hey, do we know what's going on? Who do we call when something goes bump in the night? How do we, kind of respond to it? How do we contain it? The same financial controls are going to apply. And NACHA has now created this in 2 phases throughout this year. So the first phase applies to all ACH participants, but this was for all high value, right? Kind of high volume transaction, participants. Then really in June 22nd here of, this month, just a couple of days ago, everyone else in the ACH network is now kind of subject to these rules. Okay, so the key thing is really having that documented process, the review, and that evidence to support the audit, right? If you are audited, right, the recovery, the due care conversations. And that's where increasingly, especially that false pretenses clause, I'd really ensure everyone is also considering this not just a financial control, but also a cyber risk as well, right? Because it's bridging, that's the way these attacks are happening. So information security and cybersecurity needs to be part of your conversations with your finance teams, right, and leaders about how you're handling business payments and fraud to a business. So how are businesses protecting themselves? We already kind of looked at a couple examples of how to battle the BEC attack chain, but let's kind of step through this of what it looks like versus with or without certain capabilities. So if we look at the stage on the left, and this is sort of, again, the stages of those BEC attacks, the key thing is, can you catch that initial compromise of that phishing link, right? That as more advanced and, harder to detect as they are, or can you just simply detect that initial compromise of that user account, that business email compromise? That's critical, right? That fraudulent request where that users, compromised users now really kind of, that adversary is looking at that email communication and then sending, those legitimate emails and those payment releases, right? So the key thing is you want to be able to detect this as early as possible to get ahead of these because of how quickly, right, these attacks can happen. Okay. And then you need that context. If, right, you were going to be subject to BEC fraud or you wired money out and you had to be able to find a way to pull it back, right? Do you have all the evidence and context there to support that determination that this was, right, a fraudulent request, that you did have all these policies and procedures, et cetera? And then really that better opportunity to pause that payment, to be able to raise that red flag and that awareness early and often, hopefully not often, but early, to say, hey, I need to stop this transaction. Something looks off. I need to reduce that fraud exposure. That's a benefit, right, to your organization, but also your business partners or even your employees, right, depending on what you're using it for. And this is ultimately just going to help provide better structure and business revenue protection around it. The other thing I think I'd like to call out is it may not just be you receiving the email from another vendor. It could be you as the target, right? You may be, your own accounts may be compromised to then either, redirect money of your own to someone else, right? Or to even your own employees, right? We've seen instances in the past where, HR platforms, right, or kind of SaaS platforms be taken over and people's bank accounts and direct deposit via ACH are being replaced with attacker bank accounts. So really, this is not just hey, I'm going to receive these emails from someone else. You could actually be the target of where someone else is trying to take money from you. So this is kind of a key, consideration of the same incident, but two outcomes. And really, this is a very damaging, business event. And so really, how fast can you validate, protect this, and protect that revenue, and that those transactions is really key. Okay. So where should organizations really focus first? Where do we really recommend this? The first thing, defend those user identities, right? Everything starts with that trust of that user, as Robert and Connor were saying, right? But that's where the attack starts, is that phishing email, that phone call, that social engineering, as we like to call it, really trying to manipulate and convince you to click something to give up your credentials, your MFA token in some way. So you really need to have, obviously, MFA by bare minimum, please, but increasingly phishing resistant MFA, right? To where it can't just be a simple 6-digit code you get texted to you. Even that app on your phone is different. We're talking, now FIDO keys, YubiKeys, even, device bound, authentication, things like that is something that an attacker doesn't have. They can't access that. You need the level up there. And least privilege. Who's got access to things they probably shouldn't have? It's probably the Wild West out there. I know many organizations may be like, I don't know. That's a key thing. Who's got the privileges to do certain things, focus on maybe those transactions, right? Being able to do those privileged activities and reviewing who's got access there. If you need an audit, ask for help to review that. But that's a key thing. Reduce what privileges people actually have in the environment that they just simply don't need for their role. And then, really the ITDR, the identity threat detection response. If you can't put in phishing resistant MFA, if kind of the privilege is a little bit of the Wild West, just make sure you have a way to detect and respond to it. Okay. The other thing is reducing your attack surface area. So just the way that the attacks are going to come in is either compromising username and kind of passwords, whether it's often stolen in some way, or increasingly there are ways of compromising and attacking and exploiting VPNs, right? RDP, remote desktop, right? Internet-facing systems that may store usernames and credentials and passwords. And so by compromising these devices, they're able to actually gather up those credentials to then navigate in. So really thinking about making your attack surface small, be hard to attack, have as few avenues in, right? So this could be patch management. It could be, kind of disabling certain ports and protocols, which is more of a technical term, but, think of different services running and, how you're handling system configuration, where it may be exposing things that just don't need to be running. On that note, hardening third-party and vendor access. Who's got access to your network, right, where they could start to gain access to certain things or to participate in this activity if they're going to start to be bouncing around. So think about your third-party contractors. Are you giving them a guest email where they're able to communicate with your people, right? Are you adding them in to your, O365 tenant or domain? Those are important things to consider as well. Visibility monitoring, you've heard me talk about it repeatedly, but can you detect these more advanced capabilities right, by attackers where it's token abuse, it's suspicious mailbox rules where they're trying to hide any kind of commentary and activity. If they're going back and forth, they don't want you to know that they're already, kind of acting as you. They're going to put it into the delete folder, right, or something like that, or some other folder where you're never going to really look, right? Those are examples of those kind of things. Or like impossible travel. Why is this user able to log in from New York and then suddenly the United Kingdom or London in a matter of 15 minutes? That's simply not physically possible. That's an impossible travel scenario. But those types of logins would suggest that, an account has been compromised. And then really prepare for disruption. Right? We're talking about business email compromise and fraud, not necessarily ransomware, but really think about any sort of damaging event to your finances, your operations, your ability to execute your mission. Really, what would that be? What would your response functions be? How would you handle a fraudulent payment that you needed to pull back? How would you handle an account compromise where someone's going to do maybe fraud and maybe steal some data? How do we know? And then not just recovery, but prevention. It's always learn from an incident. God forbid if we have one, right? But now it's a matter of if, not when, or sorry, no, it's not a matter of when, not if, excuse me. And so really thinking through how do we learn from incidents and activities that we have? How do we improve those policies and procedures? How do we improve the way that we work? That's a really key thing. We don't ever want to be repeating the same incident over and over again. And so Total's platform does a various different, aspects of this. But we're really working together with Diverge to also address these threats. So I want to actually pass it back to Robert and kind of highlight, anything else you'd like to add on kind of what I recommended on the recommendations to harden, or simply how together we're helping address some of these threats from your perspective, Robert.
Yeah, sure. So the only thing that I would add here, that in this scenario is super important, is how do you know that your people are actually following these protocols that you've established? So this idea of simulating and testing people, it becomes super important. And that's one of the key aspects of any security awareness training protocol as well, is the idea that you can simulate these emails to your people and see if they can identify them, see how they behave in relation to them, etc. So every one of these is a piece of what we call defense in depth, right? So there is no magic technology that we put in place and suddenly you can just forget about these risks. Unfortunately, this is become a business and leadership area where you need to be involved to ensure that your company is fully protecting itself. It's no longer the IT company's job to just implement a couple controls and you can kind of forget about it.
Yep.
So to walk through what a couple of these are, just to connect the dots back to how they interact with this business email compromise and wire fraud scenario. So the top left is the managed cloud SIEM. So if we can't prevent what we can't see. So a SIEM is a log collection platform. So it pulls everything from your endpoints, from your cloud platforms like 365, from your network, right? And it gives Andrew's team the opportunity to see something fishy and then take action or alert us that something's going on. The next one over, your EDR, that's really about that endpoint. Is there anything funny going on at that endpoint that we need to take action on? And what you want to do, he brought up the point of being able to prevent, right? So the key principle here that we haven't mentioned is really that you need to assume that you will be breached. We have to operate under the assumption that we'll be breached. The question is, how do you react to that? How do you detect and then react to that? And the EDR would allow us then to isolate a compromised computer in real time. And the same concept then applies to MXDR. So that's the idea of a business email compromise occurs. Can we detect that in your Office 365 in real time? And can we lock that account down to prevent it from sending out any emails to your clients, threatening them or trying to compromise them? Right? So the quicker we can respond and take action in that risky, impossible travel scenario Andrew mentioned, the better. The more capable the more resilient you are to attacks. And that's why these bottom layers are important. So SOAR is the ability to automate those actions. So once it's identified this a possible risky sign in, this indicator that someone's trying to attack you, the system should be able to act automatically and lock it down. You don't want to take any chances. There are occasions where these are false positives, but the important part is to act like you're always under attack, because you are. Like, just as an example, during this presentation, this webinar, over just on one client with about 100 seats, they've received about 287 phishing emails. All right, so just think about that. Like, if this was dodgeball and you had 287 balls thrown at you at the same time, how are you protecting yourself? How are you deflecting all of those attacks? And some of them are going to get through, right? So you think through that chain, and how are you going to protect yourself? Now, that's part of what GRC is. GRC is about planning. It's about seeing, do I have the right controls in place? Am I verifying that these things are working? Right? That's governance. Right? Going through, making sure that you know how to execute your incident response plan, who to call, how to pull back that mistaken ACH, how to execute, how to report to the FBI for that matter. And then the last one that really addresses that controlling the attack surface is SASE. So just imagine that we can lock down your devices and your systems. We create what's called a virtual security perimeter. So SASE means that any device, to be able to access your systems, to hold your data, it's got to be coming from that secure network location. So we really restrict it down. So just imagine, even if they tricked me into giving them my password and they stole my token, if I have the right SASE conditional access in place, I can't log into the Office 365 public web. So I can't use that information to actually compromise the company. So these are all pieces of that defense in depth that help prevent, that make it easier for you to rely on your narrow focus part that the human can enact, which is, what do you do once you're going to go ahead and make that account change? So that's the last part here, is ultimately IT plays a role, but what we want you to walk away from today is the idea that it is your responsibility to take action on this ACH fraud risk. Like, ultimately, you do need to now enact your own stringent verifications to ensure that you live up to the NACHA requirements here. So while we can help you with your identity hardening, so protecting your users' identities, preventing business email compromise, controlling the surface attack area to detecting them when it does happen and responding, we can help you with those elements. You really are going to need to implement those human-based control verifications in your accounts payable team. We've established the volume of the attacks out there, and that idea that you're a target is kind of gone, right? You're just part of this vast wave of attacks that are happening. And that statistic I shared of just in the last hour, the number that came into a small firm, how likely that's happening to you right now. And we've established that there are these great technical controls that help you prevent and make sure that you're more likely to be resilient to these, but it's still on you. And that's why this one we felt was so important to get out to you right away, is not only is it the deadlines of these rule changes, but it's something you can take action on today. Before the end of today, you can have changed your verification protocols with your staff. So with that, we want to make sure that you can ask any questions that you might have to help you take that action today.
Yes.
So the first one that we've got here from Anonymous is, you talked about voice cloning and deepfake video calls being used after an email gets through. If an employee gets a call that sounds exactly like the CEO, asking them to approve a wire transfer, what is the one process every finance team should have in place before that call ever happens? Connor, Andrew?
Hey, Andrew, I would say I would ultimately, you recognize there's urgency behind the call. I know it's your CEO ultimately, but you would hang up, get off the phone, and then call them back or contact them back on a known number or known system, not a number you just received on the phone call. I don't know, Andrew, you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think it's exactly that, right? If this seems, kind of suspicious, I would also say, yes, it's the CEO, but I think it's really important to also say, look, this has to go through a proper process. I've got to go to the finance team. I can't just go to the CEO. I can't just go buy stuff for you. I have to go through proper process. And that includes, or should include, going and calling someone else to validate and verify. I would absolutely say, yeah, Connor, I don't think anyone would ever get mad if you picked up the phone and said, are you sure about this? Before money's wired out, right? So I think that's definitely the best thing, is at least have that kind of 2-person rule, pick up the phone or some way of communicating in a trusted method, but that you can verify it's actually that person.
So it may be that you've established a code word with the CFO so that if this type of request ever comes through, that they know and expect to be challenged with that.
We have a few other questions. Andrew, I'm going to throw this to you first. The Nacha rule changes put fraud monitoring responsibility on the business, not the bank. For a CFO or controller watching this, what is the one thing they need to implement immediately to avoid being on the wrong side of a compliance finding?
Yeah, there's many things that we covered. I think the first thing is you got to get a policy and procedure in place about how you're going to be able to track, validate, and vet these types of changes or requests. That's going to make it very easy to start getting, monitoring, right, and other things done if it does happen. But that's where especially you got to be able to show you have a structured process for this. So I would be going just as like we talked about, what is your process? Asking that question, team, finance person, go and be like, how are we handling ACH verification processes? And if it's a fraudulent user, walk me through how we do that. I would go down the hall and ask your team that question, who's handling these payments. But I think the process is the first thing that I would start out with. It gives you that governance and that structure that Robert mentioned is so important. But especially when dealing with regulation, that's the first thing that if you don't have that, you're going to be in trouble, that you didn't have a process to follow, and therefore you couldn't do the follow-on activities. So that's what I would say to really be the first thing, is to just open up that conversation and ask how you handle it today. And if not, starting to get a baseline, process, procedure, and some, verification in place just to start with.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, I think everybody needs to understand that when this situation does occur, and you may need to prove to them that you have these in place. What does that mean? That means you have a written document that describes how you do it, right? You have a process to review that process on at least an annual basis and update it accordingly. You have a process to train the people that would be part of these transactions, and you have a process to test that your people follow that religiously, right? These are key components that you want to be able to prove to them if there is a situation where they're like, well, prove to me that you put the correct measures in place.
Yeah. And I think it's important to emphasize that these requirements are already in place, right? They came into effect earlier this week. So it's good to get on the ball and kind of hustle to put these measures in play. Robert, we train our employees to spot phishing emails, but you mentioned AI is now reading stolen mailbox histories and joining active threads. At what point does employee training stop being enough, and what has to change at the technology level? It's a mouthful.
Yeah, so employee training, it's not the end all. Like, your people will be great at helping participate in the identification of BEC attack emails. Ultimately, the majority of these require someone to click on a link to give away their credential in some fashion. So it's never going to be enough to just show them, put them through training. Great, they check that box. The real challenge is sending them those attack emails of a wide variety all the time, right? I've been on calls where big firms in New York are literally releasing employees based on their risk score associated with phishing simulations. That's how seriously they are taking this in the financial industries. So just keep that in mind. It's not just a checkbox anymore. It's really as critical as testing your people. Can they live up to your expectations and help prevent your business risk? So with that, we'd like to wrap up. Ultimately, thank you for sticking around for a few extra minutes with us. But right here on the screen is a QR code that if you want to book an assessment, if you want us to help identify where your compliance gaps might be in your process and how to make sure you have a bulletproof process, please let us know. Please, use this opportunity to book an assessment. We'll be happy to come help you identify where you could improve and be more resilient to this kind of attack. And I'd like to thank Andrew. It was an incredible topic, very timely. Just reminder, the deadline for the Notch rules was June 22nd. So we're already 4 days past that. If you don't have it in place, please get that ball rolling. So again, thank you. And Connor Breskos, thank you for also joining and adding valuable information. We're always here for you. So please reach out and let us know how we can help.